somebody like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. talks a lot, and he's a fascinating figure because he's, a former heroin addict. He, by his own account, pumps himself full of testosterone. But he also eats a particular diet, and he goes falconing, and he's always, doing push-ups, things. I mean, he's like a strange figure to be like a health guru, right? And he also was on the left, as an environmentalist lawyer and as an anti-vaccine advocate, going back to the beginning of this century at the very, latest. How did he capture so much mind share on the conservative right?
COVID.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
so
which is like the missing piece of all this.
Right. So that's like when
COVID.
All of this stuff is kind of floating around, and then COVID really helps focus on coming out of that. Is it that, and I think I read this in Reason, but at the beginning, in the early 2010s or so, Pew Research asked, people on the of different political persuasions, are you generally pro or against vaccines? And it was more common for people who define themselves as being liberal or on the left to be anti-vaccine. Conservatives were pro. That has clearly flipped because of COVID.
They asked if they had trust in like medical institutions, and it was more common on the left to say no, and now it's way more common on the right. And I think, people on the right got very radicalized by COVID and distrustful of the government advice around masks or vaccines. I mean, some of the stuff they got radicalized around was valid, some not. But anyways, they got radicalized around that. And then that sort of led a lot of people on the right to be like, I talked to Alex Clark, who's this sort of a conservative influencer, podcaster, young woman. And she was saying how, they already distrusted the government about a lot of things, but they were really trusting of food and pharma. And then this made them be like, well, wait a second, why are we trusting them about this? So that's sort of, I think on the one hand, that radicalized a lot of conservatives against, institutions like food and pharma that they traditionally trusted. And then on the other hand, you had a lot of leftists who were like, I support all of these institutions, but then, they were like, I talked to a woman who was a yoga teacher, and she was saying how so many people she knew in the like gym space, yoga space, anybody who made their living like, doing things involving bodies, like, there were the shutdowns, and they felt like that was unfair. They felt like defining them as not essential was unfair. They felt like there was just like all of this stuff around COVID that radicalized them, and they started sort of protesting against it. And then that put them in touch, either in person at protests or online, with right-wingers. And people kept being like, well, if you don't, buy everything that the government is doing about COVID, that means you're a right-winger. And a certain amount of them were just like, okay, well then fine. Like, I guess I'm a right-winger now. And sort of it sort of like led to this space where people on the like, left and right who are maybe both dissatisfied with their party's sort of establishment sort of found each other over these like health concerns.